Hi everyone, my name is Sabrina Mir and I am a teaching assistant with the USC Young Scientists Program. Welcome to week 7 of the special education YouTube videos. This week we'll be doing egg in vinegar. There's a few vocabulary words that we need to get out of the way before we do our experiment. The first one is a physical change. A physical change is when the state of matter changes, but the actual substance itself is not altered. One example is water and ice. So if you take a block of ice and you melt it, it becomes liquid water, right? But in both cases, when it's an ice cube and water, it's still the same thing, it's just water. So that's an example of a physical change. Another example of a physical change is cutting a slice of bread. So if you take a loaf of bread and you cut it up into separate pieces, it's still all bread, just smaller pieces. Another vocabulary word is a chemical change. So chemical change is when a new substance is formed when you do something to the original substance. So along with a chemical change comes a chemical reaction. So a chemical reaction is when you take one or more substances and combine them, and then they turn into another substance. One example of a chemical reaction that you guys might remember from last week is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is when you take light from the sun, you take carbon dioxide, you take water, and that turns into glucose or energy and oxygen. So this is a chemical change because the 3 things we started with turn into 2 different things at the end. To see a chemical reaction take place in real life, we will be doing an experiment where we put an egg in vinegar. So the outside of an egg, the shell, is made up of something called calcium carbonate. And when you put it in vinegar, which has something called acetic acid in it, these two will form a chemical reaction. After you combine the egg with the vinegar, the calcium carbonate in the shell and the vinegar will turn into calcium acetate and carbonic acid. This carbonic acid will then break down to form carbon dioxide and water. So let's see what happens when we combine an egg and vinegar. So here are just my materials. I have an egg, a cup, and some white vinegar. I'm going to go ahead and take an egg out of the carton and put it inside the cup. Then I am going to take some of the white vinegar and pour it on top of the egg until the egg is completely covered. You can see that there's bubbles starting to form almost immediately, so this is the chemical reaction taking place. There's some carbon dioxide gas going up to the top. After a few hours, it's a little translucent. You can see the yolk through the shell. And the next day, you can still see the chemical reaction taking place, some bubbles floating to the top, and this egg shell continuing to dissolve. What you saw on the outside of the shell was these bubbles around the egg, right? That's breaking down the calcium carbonate shell. If you leave this for a couple of days, the shell will actually completely break down. The egg, however, will stay as an egg shape. It won't just collapse because there's other things that are protecting the egg besides the eggshell, like membranes. What you have after a few days is just this soft lining around the egg. After you leave it for maybe 5 or 6 days, the egg will become very squishy, like in this picture. So you can actually start to bounce your eggs in vinegar and they might pop, they might not, but they become squishy and nothing like what an egg feels like. So this is in essence what a chemical reaction is. We took the shell of the egg and the vinegar actually broke down the shell and created a new substance, which was the calcium acetate, the carbonic acid, and carbon dioxide gas. Our diverse scientist for this week is an African-American chemist by the name of St. Elmo Brady. He was the first African-American to receive a PhD in chemistry in the United States. After this, he taught at historically African-American universities across the country. He did a lot of work with chemical reactions. He actually added different types of substances to something called carboxylic acids and saw how that changed how acidic this acid was. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm excited to see you guys next week for week 8 of the special education YouTube videos.